Pyjama Mamas.
I put on my pajamas and then I go back.
The automotive industry doesn't have a fantastic track record when it comes to connecting with women, but Vauxhall have really sought to change that with its Pyjama Mamas campaign. And I'm here with Katie Mackay, partner at Mother, to talk about the strategy behind the campaign. So the Pyjama Mamas campaign got a huge amount of attention. You got a lot of social media activity, a lot of people had an opinion on it, which is interesting. A lot of people don't have a big opinion on car advertising in general. Could you talk a bit about the strategy behind the campaign and why it was you decided to target mums?
I think we decided to target mums because we felt that car manufacturers really weren't talking to people who were buying their cars. When we started looking at the SUV category, we were quite horrified at the sea of sameness. Normally it's a red car driving out of the city into the open road with the promise of adventure, and more often than not it's a man seeking that adventure. But when we actually started to dig into the buyer data and talk to families who this segment is targeting, we realised that 7, maybe 8 out of 10 purchase decisions are made by the woman in the family. And I think some of the furore has been because we've talked about this as a family car for mums who are using it as mum of the family. And that wasn't something that they were ashamed of or that they felt they had to talk down. Actually, they wanted someone to recognise that they were picking what the car was and they wanted a car that talked to them. So we felt like, let's flip things on its head. Let's not make this about adventure, leaving your everyday, but let's take a kind of beautiful look at the everyday and do it with our tongue firmly in cheek. So we looked at mums, what they do with their family cars, and looked at the school run. And then actually it was one of the creative teams who came with a huge selection of newspaper headlines going back over 5 or 6 years about Pyjama Mamas, and they're actually from Latin America, the team. We call them the Three Amigos, and they were just like, this is crazy, look at all of this furore. So we intentionally looked to play into some of that, I guess to draw on a cultural reference rather than just promise escapism, because we all know a car is not going to change your life.
With the decision to include women, to target this campaign at women, I mean, women are very excluded from automotive marketing. The experience of visiting a car dealership as a woman can be quite uncomfortable sometimes. Your questions aren't always answered. You know, that the whole category as a whole perhaps isn't the most inclusive. I mean, was that something that you directly thought to tackle?
Yeah, I would agree that it feels like it's a very male-dominated category, from the communications through to the buying experience. And that was something we actively wanted to challenge. We worked with all of the other agencies involved to ensure that at every touch point our content was talking more to the women than previously, but we didn't want to do it to such an extent that it would alienate men who would be interested. So it is something that was discussed, and of course Vauxhall shared the whole communications package with their entire business. So there was more of an awareness of what may have been driving women or men into their dealerships. And I think it seems like it's just been a code that has been replicated and not challenged. And so I certainly hope that this might be the start of communications that talks in a more rounded and more 21st century way to men and women who are looking to purchase cars.
And with the ASA looking at gender stereotyping and with the growing focus on how family life is depicted in advertising, I mean, do you think that we're on a cusp of a change in how mothers are depicted in advertising?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we spent a lot of time talking to mums before we developed this campaign. And the biggest thing that came out was that they're fed up of being talked down to, but they're equally as fed up of all this pressure to be perfect, and the belief that every mum is not just a mum and that's not good enough. So we were trying to strike a balance and to do so with humour, so that we didn't feel that we were patronising or condescending, but at the same time it was an accessible aspiration rather than something that was untouchable. I definitely think that we will start to see a significantly different portrayal of families. What I hope is that we don't all start pushing it too far the other way. because I don't think that it helps men or women, young or old, to kind of set unreal expectations and aspirations, or to suggest that your family life has to be something far-reaching or spectacular. It's okay just to have a quiet night in on the sofa, or just to be an everyday normal family. And I think we just need to make sure that we tread the right line, not being stereotypical, not being patronising, but at the same time not being unrealistic.
You've used humour within this campaign, and perhaps historically that's something that isn't seen so much in advertising. It's often the dad is having all the fun and the mum is kind of this miserable, joyless old shrivel sort of cleaning up. I mean, was that something you kind of really consciously went for?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that we felt that it would be appropriate to play in the Pyjama Mama space without doing it with a real sense of humour, because most people's reaction when the headlines were all out about them being banned from the school gates and the supermarkets were, oh, come on, the world has gone mad, this has gone too far. But at the same time, we wanted to show that they had real style and swagger. And I think if you tried to do that too straight, then it would have fallen flat too. So it was very much intentional that it felt tongue-in-cheek. Although I have to say, I think some people on social media didn't quite get that it was meant to be funny, which is where some of the furore, I think, came from.
And did you expect to polarise opinion with this? Did you kind of bake that into the strategy, and how did you ensure that everybody was comfortable with that? We
absolutely did. I think the first time we presented the work to Simon and Tamas and the team in London, and then when we went over to Germany to present to the Opel team, we actually had a whole section before we even got to the work of a reference tape of all of the clips, and look, this is how much of a culturally hot topic this is, and we talked about the risks of going after something that was so intentionally provocative, and it was a risk that Vauxhall and ourselves felt was worth taking.
They tried to ban them from the school gates, but that didn't stop them.
There are very few brands that can claim to ignite an equally passionate debate on piston heads and Mumsnet. But Vauxhall, with its latest Pyjama Mamas ad campaign, managed to do just that. So we're here in Mother's Shoreditch office with Vauxhall's marketing director, Simon Oldfield, to talk about the strategy behind the campaign.
Look at their sweet jam jar. The new Vauxhall Crossland X.
The automotive sector doesn't have the best reputation when it comes to marketing to women, and perhaps women have been a segment that have been misunderstood or misrepresentative by automotive brands. I mean, can you talk a bit about the Pyjama Mamas campaign and what it was that made you decide to sort of go out there and take a stand in this way?
What we did when we did the research for this car was very clearly identify that while perhaps the person buying the car might not always be a woman, actually the female partner in a relationship, because it's very much seen as a car for households, for probably families as well, would have a very big influence on the decision making. So that was really one of the insights that we had. And while, as I say, this car is really positioned as a spacious, practical family car for getting kit and kids here, there and everywhere in a normal busy week, it's also a car that is driven by somebody who wants to say something about themselves, somebody who has an attitude, that has a bit of swagger and wants to say something about themselves. And it was those two angles really that came together into the Pyjama Mamas idea.
And did you love it straight away? Because when you look at a lot of the advertising in the sector, it's pretty interchangeable. You know, maybe it doesn't have a lot of swagger, it has a lot of masculine rhetoric, a lot of long, loving shots of car bonnets. I mean, how did you, on a personal level, decide to make a change? Because you must have factored in that would create quite a lot of debate, positive and negative, in the sector. I mean, how did you kind of bake that into the strategy?
Well, I think right from the start we realised that this car is going into a very busy sector. There are a lot of new models that have been recently launched into it. We're perhaps a little bit late to the party. And as you say, a lot of the sort of sector defining creative and advertising is very Me Too. It's very samey, it's shots of very polished, shiny cars in urban environments with people sort of having adventures in an urban environment. and it's quite interchangeable. So one of the other things that we knew we needed to do was have quite a lot of cut through, and we saw a few really good ideas, but this was the one that really stood out from Mother, all around that same basic creative idea. And we just loved it right from the start. There were a few people internally going, is this the right approach? Is it a case of perhaps just toning it back a little bit? But I think the combination of the TV commercial, which is really getting focused on that sort of talkability around a social discussion that's going on at the moment and latching onto that, and then also balanced a little bit by the more fashion-orientated activity of the stills that we did with Rankin, and the balance of that with some of the other activity that we did, some of the small digital films, the social activity, the work we did with Channel 4, really gives a more rounded approach to the overall campaign. So it isn't, yes, the TV is very polarising, and we've had plenty of negative comments, and surprised that Vauxhall's done an ad like that, as well as some really positive comments as well. And I say, we understood it was going to be polarising. And that was what we want, because we wanted talkability.
How is the market being impacted by Brexit and the way that people are choosing to buy cars and the relationship that they have with manufacturers? I mean, what do you see as the kind of key shifts in the market?
In terms of shifts in the market, I mean, Brexit itself hasn't had a lot of impact in terms of the Brexit as a phenomenon. I mean, I think the biggest impact from what happened on June the 23rd is an economic one in terms of the devaluation of the pound. So most cars, even if they're made in the UK, and certain, have got a very high level of components that are priced in either dollars or euros. So there's been a cost increase there, and a lot of cars are imported as well. So there's been pressure on manufacturers in terms of their margins, and there's been a pressure on pricing. The car market in the UK has been incredibly strong. For 5 or 6 years, it's been at record high levels. So there's nothing really fundamentally wrong with the UK car market, but we are seeing some inflationary pressure there, which will have a dampening effect on the retail demand. While interest rates stay low, I think that demand will still stay pretty strong, because so many cars are now bought on finance through sort of personal lease type programs. I mean, probably 70 to 80% of retail cars are bought in that way now. And then obviously the cost price of the vehicles. So we're seeing some increase in the cost price of vehicles. There's some inflation in the car market, just as we're seeing it in every other sector of the marketplace, which is a function of the devaluation of the pound. So that's sort of the Brexit effect, as it were. And so we are seeing the car market cooling a little bit, but from a very high position. In terms of our other trends, financing and the move to financing cars, a bit like people renting rather than buying houses and things like that, people renting their mobile phones, that's absolutely a trend that we've seen over the last 10 years. So people are much less focused on the list price of cars, more on how much does it cost a month, and what am I getting? And so people are, yes, focused around the car itself. They're a lot more focused about the technology and the kit in the car, the connectivity, the features. Can I integrate my mobile phone? Can I get my Spotify library playing? And all of that sort of thing is becoming more important to consumers, rather than perhaps the traditional, how safe is it? What's the fuel consumption? Because all cars are now very safe.
For many people, and myself included, the experience of going into a car dealership is quite daunting. Yeah. It's not often a fantastic retail experience, and we're seeing the introduction of more technology, of VR, and perhaps the ability to buy a car online. You've changed the way that you communicate with consumers with this advertising campaign. I mean, how will that translate into the experience on the ground? There's
definitely a shift going on. I mean, we're seeing a lot more people doing their research online for cars, just like everything else. So I think the traditional view was that when somebody was thinking of changing their car, they would perhaps visit 6-7 retailers, going and looking at cars, test driving, getting brochures, reading through them, working out what they want. Now the number is something like 1.3, 1.5 retailers. So a lot of that pre-work, that research, that comparison is all being done in an online environment. So the importance of the retailer is in some ways becoming less and more important. So it's becoming less important because a lot of the information that previously people would have gone to a physical retailer to get during that decision-making time is now available online. It's becoming more important because actually when they do visit a retailer, they're probably in almost a ready-to-buy situation. Manufacturers and retailers are recognising that people want a different retail experience. Because if people are not visiting a retailer on a regular basis as part of their car buying decision making, you've almost got to go where the consumers are. So we're seeing more pop-up stores in shopping centres, using more technology, trying to offer a more traditional retail experience. That whole idea of going into a retailer feeling you need to haggle, some people love it. A lot of people find it quite an alien and a daunting experience. And so manufacturers are trying to change that, and retailers are trying to change that. So moving more online, and there are manufacturers, and we're beginning to experiment in terms of how you move more of that retail, the actual retailing transactional experience, not just information gathering, into an online environment, and how do you make it as easy as possible for the consumer so they feel in control. So we're seeing a move towards full transaction online. I think that is a trend, and I think we're seeing a trend towards more experiential retail spaces within the non-traditional motor alley type of thing.
How do you see the emotional relationship between a car and a consumer sort of shifting over generations?
I mean, I think there are a number of sort of human emotional behavioural aspects that the car taps into. One is, a bit like your clothes, it's a little bit of a armour around you that sort of creates a personality that you want to portray to the outside world. And your car, just like your clothes, is part of that for a number of people, and it's an important part of that because it says something about who you are, who you think you are, and what you want to say about yourself to the outside world. I think there is that whole aspect of the personal space. It's that me time. You're not with your family at home. You're not at work in the work environment. You're in your car, and actually it's a bit like when you're at an airport lounge. Sometimes you're not on the plane necessarily, and you're not in the office. You're somewhere in between, and you can use that time to yourself. It's almost free time in a sense that you've gained. I know there was a lot of research done quite a few years ago about SUVs and between different customer types. And I know women in particular loved the higher ride height in an SUV and the sense that they had a lot of metal around them, because actually it made them feel stronger as individuals and safer on the road, and gave them more confidence on the road, because they felt in a way that they felt in a safer environment for them and their family, but it also gave them the confidence against perhaps some of these boy racer people cutting them up, which they felt in smaller cars, in more traditional cars, they felt more intimidated. In SUVs, they don't feel so intimidated. And it works also, I think, in the male environment as well, that it feels muscular. They've got big wide wheel arches and things like that. They're rugged. So the SUV is quite clever as a product concept in that it touches a lot of the hot points, let's say, for both male and female drivers.
So some of the complaints weren't actually about the context of the communication or the Pyjama Mamas. It was because we were encouraging mums to drive their kids to school rather than walk or cycle, so kind of you might anticipate a whole lot of things, but actually you'll get complaints about something else. I think it reinforced alongside our KFC whole chicken campaign that if you're going to create work you want to get real people talking about, and you do that through being provocative and having a point of view, you have to make sure that you're prepared that not everybody's going to love it. And then I think beyond that, just make sure that you have the social bases covered so that you can respond, and don't necessarily believe that just because there are negative comments that means everybody feels negatively. So actually when you analyse social sentiment, often it's the smallest number of followers who have the loudest voice, it seems, but they actually don't, they just might be more opinionated. And then I think, remember, it's advertising, and it's so easy for everybody to ignore what we do. The fact that you can get people talking through a 30-second spot or an integrated campaign, that's what we should all be trying to do a bit more of. And so I guess I like the fact that it prompted a debate within the industry as well around what does good advertising look like these days and how much of a point of view should we be trying to have. If we were going to change one thing, I think I would have kept some of the pyjamas from the shoot. I would have loved some, so I could be wearing pyjamas with you. But in all seriousness, I don't think we would have changed anything.
How is the consumer decision-making process, you know, that buying journey, how has that changed and what does that mean for you as a marketer? I mean, what's the biggest challenges that you face in connecting with consumers?
We want to have a conversation with consumers rather than being, I think consumers are fed up with being talked at. And that's perhaps the biggest shift. So you've got to have a dialogue with people, and in a way the Pyjama Mamas campaign was trying to latch onto that a little bit and to start having a dialogue, because it is a conversation piece. As I said, it was polarising and we knew it was going to be polarising, so at least then let's get into a conversation. Because I think by having that more sort of adult relationship between the consumer and the manufacturer or the person selling the product, that actually people become to appreciate what you have and what you've got and what we stand for as an organisation. And technology allows us to have more of that conversation. I still think it's important for us to say this is who we are and this is what we stand for, but not in a way that just sort of says, you know, aren't we great, this is why you should buy it, go and buy it. But that needs to be part of a sort of perhaps the point of a very big pyramid that goes down and deeper into a relationship. Now, data helps us with that, and an attitude and social media and how we then take those ideas and listen to what consumers are talking to us about, and then responding to that. And we're doing that a lot more. We're doing quite a lot within the social space and on our website, where we're doing social listening of our customers and non-owners about what's important to them, and then trying to reflect that back in what we do with some of our sort of customer self-help videos and things like that. We're listening to what they think is important and what questions they're asking about our products, and then using that information to feed back into the marketplace in a conversational way. So actually, we need to have sort of bigger ears than mouths, I suppose, as marketeers these days.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk us through the campaign. It's really great to see a brand taking a creative leap of faith and talking to a market that perhaps doesn't get talked to enough in the automotive sector.
Great, thanks very much, Nicola. I've enjoyed it.
In terms of the depiction of women, where do you think we are on that journey? I mean, do you see category norms shifting? Because automotive is quite a traditional category. I mean, in 5-10 years' time, where do you think the industry will have changed? I mean, will we see more diverse representations of women in advertising? Is that coming? Do you feel that this is part of a broader shift in the industry?
I really hope it is, and I hope that it's not just women. I hope that in less than 5 years' time we start to see that we have a more inclusive, more diverse workforce, that we reflect that in our communications. And I do think, certainly here at Mother, it feels that that's something that we're actively pushing for, but that is naturally happening too. It feels like the world is changing. We are becoming more diverse as an industry. We could accelerate that. We need to look at how we can bring in talent from different backgrounds. I think that is the secret to really changing the old rules of how each category behaved and the way we portrayed genders and living situations. Because in the real world, everything's blurring. So if we don't blur that a bit internally in the way we work, the people we hire, the way we engage with our clients and the ideas that we present, then things won't change. So I hope that this is the start of a different kind of portrayal of women in the automotive industry, but that it's also just one of many markers over the last 18 months of us taking off kind of blinkers and being a bit more reflective and aspirationally reflective of what's going on in the real world. We'll see.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sit comfy, mummy, and keep rocking those pajamas, mamas.